The Tuesday, November 20th, 2018 City Planning Commission meeting. We will begin the meeting with a roll call.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Briggs.
Here.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Here.
Commissioner Mills.
Here.
Commissioner Milstein.
Here.
Commissioner Sauve.
Here.
Commissioner Trudeau.
Here.
Commissioner Weatherby. Commissioner Woods.
Here.
Almost a full house with a quorum.
Great, thank you. Moving on to introductions. Do we have any introductions this evening?
Nope.
All right. Approval agenda. Do I have a motion to approve? Moved by Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Sauve. Any changes or comments regarding the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? It's approved. Moving on to minutes of previous meeting, and we have two sets of minutes for a review from our July 17th and November 7th meeting. I would like a motion for both of them together, moved by Commissioner Sauve, seconded by Commissioner Trudeau. Are there any comments, changes regarding the minutes? Seeing no one, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? They are approved. We are now at reports from City Administration, City Council, Planning Manager, Planning Commission officers and committees, written communications and petitions, starting with our City Council representative, Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because of the timing of the November general election, there have actually been two city council meetings since we've last met. The first meeting, which occurred on November 8th, three items of relevance. The Midtown condominiums, the 260-some low-rise, mid-rise condos being built at the corner of Maple and Pauline, the parcel formerly of the Grace Bible Church, has moved forward and passed 7-3. The 132 Hill low-rise student apartment building passed, I believe, unanimously. And then additionally, a resolution directing this body to re-examine our ADUs, accessory dwelling units ordinance, in order to see if there are any low-hanging fruit to make these a bit more approachable. Since 2016, when the city adopted or amended our zoning ordinance to allow accessory dwelling units or smaller units that are secondary to a single-family home that can be rented to family members or tenants, there have been a number of people interested, 2 permits applied for, but 0 constructed, which was not our goal. We were hoping to get about 15 a year, and we've fallen short of that in the last 2 or 3 years. So hopefully we can, as a body, try to, while respecting character of neighborhoods, try to find a way to make these a bit more approachable to the residents who want them and the future tenants who need them. Then last night, on November 19th, we had a meeting it was the first session of the new city council. There's been a turnover of 4 members. Last night we got out at 1:30 a.m., so I am peachy. Two items of immediate relevance. First, this body cares and discusses affordability and environmental sustainability a great deal. And actually, those two came together in a great way last night. City Council voted to fund the Ann Arbor Housing Commission to the tune of over $200,000 for the redevelopment of our affordable housing project on Broadway to become hopefully Michigan's first net zero affordable housing development. In addition to that, there are also another $40,000 to $60,000, I can't remember how the final number shook out, of additional sustainability funds sent to our new Office of Sustainability, which will be responsible for implementing our climate action plan, which was passed in 2012, but to date has not been implemented. There remains disagreement among City Council of a long-term funding source for that Office of Sustainability, which will be a conversation as we head into the budget season, which culminates in May. Finally, as this body may be aware, Transportation Commission and City Council put forward a request to do a transportation or mobility study of the lower town area of Ann Arbor, just over the Broadway Bridge from where we sit today. We expanded the scope to also include the Pontiac Trail Corridor. As we know, we get a lot of commuter traffic, as well as there are a few new private developments being built, and the university continues to expand the medical center and their parking garages in that area. We hope to partner with a consultant to redesign and better plan how we get people in and out of that area of our town. That contract was postponed for approval and will be coming back hopefully after a renegotiation with city staff's first choice.
Great, thank you. Mr. Lerner, do you have a report for us this evening?
Very brief. I'd like to thank the Planning Commission for your accommodation with the cancellation of the working session on the 13th. I was able to attend the American Association of Retired Persons Livable Communities Conference, which I'm really excited to share at a future working session, and particularly as we talk about starting to update our master plan potentially. I think there's lots of opportunities to incorporate the principles of that program. While it is coming from AARP, the principles within it are fantastic for all members of our community. So I'm really excited about what I learned and the opportunity to bring some of those principles in our community going forward. And then for those on the Ordinance Revisions Committee meeting, I do anticipate a meeting after the Thanksgiving holiday. That packet will be going out sometime in the next few days. We will be diving into detail on some of the list of Unified Development Code 2.0 potential amendments to start giving a more in-depth discussion on those. Generally, my intention with those is to make some progress on numerous potential amendments, and then probably early in the new year figure out a good community engagement strategy so we can share some of that work before we go from the Ordinance Revisions Committee onto a full public hearing.
Thank you. Are there any Planning Commission officers or committees that'd like to report? Commissioner Mills.
It's not one of our formal subcommittees, but because it was before us before, I thought you might like to hear this. There's a subcommittee of the Energy Commission that's doing the dark skies lighting ordinance. That group has been, a couple of those folks and Erica and I have been working together to look at an ordinance. I think we're about halfway through, so that I'm thinking will come before either ORC or we'll ask to have it on a working session agenda in the next month or two. I think that's reasonable.
Thank you. Any other Planning Commission officers or committees to report? Right. Written communications and petitions, we have a couple of items, so please take a look at that when you have an opportunity. And then we are now at audience participation. This is a time for the audience to address the Planning Commission in regards to any item that is not on our agenda for this evening. So if there's anyone that wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to an item that is not on our agenda, please step forward. You'll have 3 minutes to address us. Seeing no one, we will move on to public hearing scheduled for our next business meeting. Mr. Leonard.
Upcoming meeting for public hearings for the December 4th Planning Commission will be one new public hearing for 2660 Apple Way. This is an annexation and zoning for city council approval. A request to annex this 0.52 acre parcel from Ann Arbor Township and zone it R1B. Not a new public hearing, but a continued public hearing. I also anticipate that the Lockwood Senior Housing Development on Jackson Road would be returning for continuation of the previous public hearing on that same agenda.
Great, thank you. Moving on to unfinished business, which we have none, and then regular business, which we have 4 items this evening. So we will begin with 10A, which is 1550 Washtenaw Avenue, Zeta Tau Alpha Addition Site Plan for Planning Commission approval. Our procedure for this evening will be for the petitioner to make up to a 10-minute presentation. Then we'll move on to a staff report, a public hearing, and then discussion. So if you don't mind just stating your name and address for the record, that'd be great. And then you are free to start when you're ready.
Thank you. I'm Toby Headinghouse. I'm an architect with Gray Design Group in St. Louis. My address is 64 Sunset Hills Drive in Edwardsville, Illinois. And Sue, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself too.
My name is Sue Dickinson. I'm with Midwestern Consulting here in Ann Arbor, civil engineer for the site. And my address is 1360 Nita Street, Pinckney.
And I'll talk very briefly about the architectural side of this project, and then let Sue talk about the improvements we're making on the site. It's a pretty straightforward project. The project is the Zeta House. It's a sorority house where they were wanting to improve a few different things inside, actually. They wanted to improve their dining area, kind of replace their obsolete kitchen that's currently operating there. And then they also wanted to expand in a very small way, their house manager's apartment. So as we started laying this out, it became apparent that that wasn't all going to fit in the area we were given. So it resulted in a small addition where we're going to push the kitchen out the back. It's about 450 square feet, 455, I think. And then by moving the kitchen out the back, that allows us to kind of reconfigure some things on the first floor. In doing that, we also decided to put a full basement addition underneath that addition. So we are expanding the basement by that same square footage. That allows us to move the laundry that's currently in that area out to the new addition and free up space for bike storage inside. So this project's already been through HDC. We have made a number of changes through that process, but they were all good changes, I think, for the project. But really, architecturally, I think that's about it. So, Sue, you want to?
Thank you. I think the best thing about this project, besides the new kitchen, is that it's an almost 2-acre site with over 20 landmark trees on it, and most of it is going to remain as it is. The front that faces the rock, the only change to that is we are adding an accessible sidewalk that goes right to the front door of the house. And we're adding a few understory trees because we're needing to mitigate for one landmark tree that currently they're actually parking on its roots. So we're mitigating for it, but we're going to keep it in place. We just had to build the sidewalk and build the driveway, redo the driveway and a couple parking spaces too close to the landmark tree, so we're mitigating for it even though we're leaving it in place. And then there was one tree that was in very poor condition that we're removing. So that's some of the improvements. So the other very important improvements that I see that we're doing for this is that we're rebuilding the sidewalks both out to Washtenaw and to Hill Street. We are organizing the parking lot that existed to the rear of the building. We're actually decreasing the vehicular parking spaces, and we're providing covered bike parking as well as bike parking inside in the basement area. We're adding a dumpster enclosure, and stormwater management is vastly improving. Currently, there is nothing structured on site, and we are storing the 100-year storm event for the disturbed area in a storm chambers underneath the new parking lot. And that will be discharging out to Hill Street. And one other item is that unfortunately we were in an area that didn't have adequate hydrant coverage, so the project is also adding a hydrant along Hill Street to provide adequate hydrant coverage. So those are the improvements that, the site improvements that are proposed, and I'll let Jeff talk about his report.
Great, thank you very much. And now we'll move on to the staff report. Mr. Khan.
The site is located near the corner of Washtenaw Avenue and Hill Street in the Malletts Creek watershed. The petitioner proposes to construct a 455 square foot kitchen addition at the northwest corner of the building, which is the back of the building. City code does not require sororities, fraternities to obtain a special exception use permission when proposing kitchen additions of less than 10% of the floor area. A basement is proposed to be constructed underneath the kitchen. to accommodate a laundry room and some storage. A new dumpster enclosure is proposed to be provided on the north side of the site and access from an improved shared access drive to Washtenaw Avenue. The petitioner proposes to handle a 100-year storm in an underground system beneath the rear parking lot. A reconstructed parking lot with van-accessible, barrier-free space is proposed at the rear or west of the building. Vehicular access will continue to be provided from an access point between Washtenaw and Hill Street, which accesses a 7-space parking lot in front of the building. An additional existing access point from Washtenaw will be enhanced and will provide access to a 13-space parking lot in the back of the house. A shared access easement will be established over this access drive to allow shared access between Zeta Tau Alpha and Chi Phi fraternity, the property to the north. Staff recommends approval of the site plan because it complies with applicable local, state, and federal laws, ordinances, standards, and regulations, limits the disturbance of natural features to the minimum necessary to allow a reasonable use of the land, and does not cause a public or private nuisance, and does not have a detrimental effect on the public health, safety, and welfare.
Thank you. At this time, I'll open up the public hearing. If there's anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this item, you may please step forward. You'll have 3 minutes to address us. If you don't mind speaking your name and address into the mic, and seeing nobody, I'll close this public hearing and move on to reading the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby approves the Zeta Tau Alpha site plan conditioned on recording a roadway easement for the portion of the public street and sidewalk that encroaches onto private property and recording a shared access easement with the Chi Phi fraternity to provide shared access to the parking areas and dumpster area. Do you have a commissioner that moves? Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Gibrandal. We are now in discussion. Anyone? Commissioner Mills.
This is a question for staff. So the code says that you don't have to do a special exception use if it's 10% addition for a kitchen. But what I heard that was that they want to redo the kitchen, but there's also an apartment as part of this. And so how does that work?
It's my understanding the apartment is interior to the building, so they're doing a slight renovation. Underneath the kitchen, and the kitchen is at the ground level, is a basement space. And typically, we don't count basement spaces that include storage, or in this case, laundry, as square footage. So the size of the building is quite large. It's over 14,000 square feet. And so the 455 square foot addition is well within that zone. I'll let the architect describe a little bit more about the renovation for the apartment.
Yeah, actually, the apartment is also very small. I think the main reason for the change, I think all we're doing really is just moving her bathroom outside her current footprint so that we can have a sitting area and a bed so that they're not all in one space. So that's the only difference.
Got it. Okay. Thanks. The other question that I have is, it feels like forever ago for us, but perhaps not so long for City Council, there was a change that was made to the ordinance about, that had to do with fraternities and sororities. I can't remember all of the details about that, but can you refresh our memories on that? And then, because I know that effectively it wasn't retroactive, it was only going to apply to fraternities and sororities that came before us subsequent to that.
No, that's a great question. The change was to add language to our code that requires a fraternity or sorority to have an affiliation with a higher educational institution with a campus in the city. So if the scope of this work were to require a special exception use amendment, then they would have to comply with those requirements, seek an amendment to their special exception use that exists on the property, and they would, as part of that code change, they would have to demonstrate that they have an affiliation with the University of Michigan in this likely instance. Because of the scope of this doesn't kick in a special exception use requirement, there's really no implication of that change to this petition.
Thank you, and thank you for telling us how that all fits.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Could you bring up the site plan? So I'm a little curious, just because I know that there's some kind of shared uses going on here too, just so I understand what's happening. So I see, I think, a property line on the lower left part of the screen here, and I see like 2 parking spaces that look like they're new. Yes. And those are not part of the main sorority here, but those belong to the neighbors. Is that the case?
No, those 2 spaces will be for the sorority.
They will be for the sorority?
Yes.
So this drive basically straddles the property line?
Yes.
Then? I see.
Yes, the driveway is shared.
I see, okay. So, and this may be a staff question. I see some, what looks like screening, if you move a little, again, north is a little weird here. There's like a shrub bed, that looks like that's happening. And I don't know if that's a screen or if that is just landscaping. But I'm just wondering about screening of the parking lot from the street. Could Steph tell us like what's going on? Like, what are they required in this area? Because I
Right.
see some, but I'm not sure if they've required it and they're just throwing that in, or if
Right.
it's supposed to go all the way across.
Right. Currently, there are vehicles that park in this vicinity, so my understanding is what the sorority is intending to do is to create slightly more formal spaces. The other thing I wanted to point out is that in order to constitute an official parking lot, it has to be more than 4 spaces or 1,200 square feet, and in this case, it's less, and it's also existing. I suppose the petitioner would be willing to provide some additional landscaping if requested. I'll let them speak to that.
And I guess I'm just a little confused. So there are all these other spaces, that are a little bit further over to the right. Are those accessed from a different direction, or are those all? It's a little unclear to me, sort of how this all gets
All the spaces that are in the backside
Yeah.
of the building itself are accessed from Washtenaw.
Okay.
And this is a shared drive, which also accesses a parking area for the fraternity just to the, I guess I should say, just to the west. And so, yes, it is a shared drive that's accessed from Washtenaw.
Okay, so they're not required screening, even though they're kind of formalizing it and giving new pavement. They're ripping the whole thing up because there's going to be a storm, detention thing underneath it. They're not required to screen the parking on
My
that
understanding
side?
is that they are and that they did. Sue, do you want to add anything to that?
I would like to look at the landscape plan a little bit closer, but I'm sure that Tina Fix is the one that prepared the landscape plan, and I know that she looked at the vehicular use area.
I guess what I would request is that there could be, as there is a little bit further up from there, that some screening could be provided for these additional 2 spots as well. Just thinking about the view from Washtenaw, and the fact that, all of these landmark trees are being left, which is fabulous, and it's like this lovely site, it really is. And it would be nice just to, with most site plans, we get some screening with the parking, so
Okay.
if there could be some extension to those additional 2 spots, so that when you look in, and that would also help screen the dumpster a little bit too, from that
True.
side view.
Yeah, very true.
So I think it would be nice to be able to bolster that a little bit more, and it just extend it further down.
Okay.
Hopefully not a, huge change, and certainly nothing that would hang us up at this level, something
Okay.
that could be easily changed in between now and city council.
Sure.
So again, I'm not saying, I'm not gonna vote for this because of that. It's more that I think that there could be just a little bit, and then added, and then I think it could, just help give some more screening to an area that, it's hard to dress that area up, right?
Right, and she may not have put it in there just because she knew that we were so close to those landmark trees, but if we're excavating for the parking lot and the curb, we can excavate
Right.
for a few small shrubs.
Right,
Yes,
right.
I agree.
Right, okay, that sounds good. And then the only other thing was, I'm always curious as a landscape architect myself, what your species were, and this drawing referred to another sheet, which then didn't have them on it. So it said see sheet 17 for additional details and things like that, and sheet 17 didn't seem like it was the right one. 22 had a bunch of landscape details, but it didn't have the list. So
Okay.
I may not have been, I looked through the whole thing, but, you know, it's not my drawing set, so I'm not going to spend 2 hours looking through it to see. But anyway, it would just be nice to know what is actually, I'm sure that our forester reviewed them. They have to be somewhere, somewhere in there.
Sheet 7.
Sheet 7, that's the landscape plan, correct?
Yeah,
But is
but-
there a list on that plan? Because
Yes.
I didn't get it when,
Bottom right corner.
because with the one that we had, the link online, I didn't see it.
There's a schedule listed on mine that has the trees and the shrubs and the names.
Ah, got it. Yep, I see it. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yep. Yeah, no, those all seem great. Okay, yep.
Okay,
For some reason, the one I was looking at, who knows, so, but thank you for
Okay.
clarifying.
no
And
problem.
Commissioner Gabrandel, just to quickly point out, so this is not going to city council, this is for our approval.
Ah, got it.
So-
Well,
This stops here, well, hopefully goes forward, but we
Right,
are the
right,
deciding
right.
body on this.
so then I guess, did you want to add something?
Along those lines, if that is a condition that you'd like to apply, we are certainly happy from a staff perspective to work with the petitioner to develop a screening for those 2 spaces. If that's a condition you would like to see, I would suggest adding it as a condition
Sure.
to any potential action, and then we would ensure that that gets incorporated prior to the final plan set.
Okay, that sounds good.
Great. Further discussion? Or an amendment to the motion?
Let's see, so can you help me with some of the wording here? So, condition upon additional screening to, again, north is a little wonky here. So additional screening to the northwest, is that correct? North
Yeah.
is to the left, is that what's happening?
Yeah.
Of the 2 additional spots to continue. Oh, okay, now that really is not good language for an amendment.
Mr.
So
Leonard,
Screening from Washtenaw Ave.
Screening from Washtenaw Ave, correct, really, that's the intent. Additional screening from Washtenaw Ave for new parking spaces.
Mr. Leonard is feverishly writing right now
Great.
what is.
Happy to hear
I'm
that.
hopeful is really great language to add to this, so we'll give him
Clearly, I'm
just.
not on the ordinance review committee.
Yes, Mr. Leonard.
A potential amendment could be to add to the motion to provide shared access to the parking areas and dumpster area, and the provision of screening, of landscape screening, to screen the new parking spaces from Washtenaw to the planning staff's requirement.
That sounds great.
That does give us the authority to ultimately come to what we deem to be an appropriate level in comparison with the ordinance requirements. We would probably benchmark it against the larger parking lot requirements, but I'm sure we can come up with something.
That sounds great.
And to be clear, if there is potential to some impact to landmark trees in that area,
Clearly,
we would likely
that's
work with
right.
the city forester just to make sure we're doing the best screening we can without adversely impacting anything.
Yep, that's great, thank you.
So that's been moved. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mills. Any discussion on the amendment? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone oppose? All right, we're back to the new motion, or the amended motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? It is approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to 10B, 2001 Varren Road, Phoenix Substation Expansion Plan Project Site Plan for City Council approval. We'll begin with the petitioner's 10-minute presentation.
Good evening. Thank you to the Planning Commission. Thank you to staff for having me here tonight. My name is Adele Pasqueras. I'm Area Manager with ITC in Local Government and Community Affairs. And Jeff, would you mind starting? Just to give you a little overview on ITC, we're the nation's leading transmission provider. We were formed, we were in the business of electrical transmissions. If you look at the screen, we're the blue shaded area. So we deliver the bulk energy from the generation source, which could be a power plant or a wind farm. So the electricity flows over the high voltage transmission lines and towers, then it goes through a distribution station where the voltage is reduced, and then it's delivered to your homes and businesses from your local utility. In your area, you have most likely DTE Energy. We were formed in 2003 in March. Would you mind going? So in this slide, our service territory is 15,800 circuit miles. We have 4 subsidiaries in 8 states. The blue shaded area, that's our ITC Michigan company, which comprises ITC Transmission and METC. Then we have ITC Midwest, which is primarily in Iowa, but there are some parts of Minnesota as well, part of Illinois. And then we have ITC Great Plains, which is mostly Kansas and Oklahoma. We have over 700 employees. And as of 2016, we were acquired by Fortis, which is a company that's based in Canada. And your brochures, and I believe I didn't give you a brochure. Has a project profile for our Apex to Phoenix transmission line project, which is currently wrapping up construction, and that's over 2 miles of underground transmission, which connects the new substation. New substation is actually Apex substation, which is on Hubbard, to Phoenix substation. That's the reason why we're here today, which is in Varren, and it's 120 kV. It will increase the reliability and the capacity of the electric grid in the region, and especially Ann Arbor. And as I said, construction is wrapping up. We're actually just pulling cable on both substations, and that's why we're here tonight to ask for the existing substation expansion. And the Phoenix substation is existing, has been here since 1968, and it's located on 2001 Varren. And as a result of the project that I just mentioned, we need to expand the existing fence. And then as a result of the fence expansion, there will need to be a retaining wall. And as a result of this work, it will impact natural features. And the expansion that we're proposing, which is in the next slide, it's minimal. It's compared to the overall area of the substation, it's pretty much the red one is a conceptual of what it would look like. And it's 18 feet by 228. And the existing fence is a 7-foot fence, so it's 6 foot, and then has 1 foot of barbed wire. We're adding a new 5-foot sidewalk per city's request. And the retaining wall, that's a picture. It's not the actual, but it will most likely look like that. So it will be a 4-foot retaining wall. And as far as the disturbance of natural features is a total of 304 inches. And we are mitigating for 326 inches, which is 7% more than the requirement. And also, we will install a monopole, which will be 100 foot tall, and that's to allow for the 2 new line positions to come into the substation. So it will be where the underground goes overhead and connects with the equipment. And the site plan complies with all applicable local, state, federal ordinances. And we have been working with the city staff since July, and there were a few revisions that, of the existing site plan, and there were comments from the city which we have addressed. And in closing, I just wanted to say that we're not just in the business of electrical transmission. We're also a partner in the community. We're heavily involved in Washtenaw County. We're in the A2Y Regional Chamber. We're involved with Ann Arbor Spark, with Huron River Watershed Council, with the Big Brothers Big Sisters of Washtenaw County, Food Gatherers, the Stewardship Network. We're currently helping with a stilled grass invasive species working group. And I thank you for your time. Please let me know if there's any questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to our staff report. Mr. Khan.
Thank you. The site is located on the north side of Varren Road, east of Pontiac Trail in the Traver Creek watershed. The site is currently used as a DTE substation on a 12.87 acre site. ITC Holdings, an electric transmission line company, would like to increase reliability of a transmission line between the Phoenix substation here and the Apex substation located at the intersection of Huron Parkway and Hubbard Road by constructing 2 underground transmission lines. The modifications will include the addition of 2 new line positions at the Phoenix substation to accommodate lines from the Apex substation. ITC intends to construct a new 100-foot tall monopole near the southwest corner of the site and expand the footprint of the existing substation at the southwest corner. The monopole will be located approximately 135 feet from Varren Road. A new 4-foot tall retaining wall will be constructed to accommodate the expansion of the substation along the south edge of the substation. A sidewalk is proposed to be constructed along the Varren Road frontage, and the petitioner has agreed to provide 17 additional feet of frontage along Varren as right-of-way. The petitioner is proposing to remove a woodland on the southwest corner of the site consisting of 112 trees, containing 112 trees consisting primarily of invasive species such as Norway maple and black locust. Additionally, the petitioner is proposing to remove 10 other trees from the southern edge of the existing station site, including 2 landmark trees. To mitigate these removals, the petitioner is proposing to plant 164 native species of trees entirely on site. 3 other landmark trees will remain on the site undisturbed. A total of 304 caliper inches of trees is required to mitigate the loss of the woodland and landmark trees. A total of 326 caliper trees will be provided. So 304 inches removed, 326 inches provided. The petitioner is proposing to provide a temporary timber bridge over Traver Creek to provide access for construction equipment, and has received a drain use permit from Washtenaw County, and that's going to be a temporary bridge. The city does not require a wetland use permit for temporary encroachments into the wetland. Staff recommends approval of the planned project site plan because it complies with all applicable local, state, and federal ordinances, standards, and regulations. It will not cause a public or private nuisance, and it will not have a detrimental effect on public health, safety, or welfare. Staff further recommends approval of the planned project modifications because the project is consistent with the standards of approval for planned projects in the Unified Development Code.
Thank you. We'll now open up the public hearing for anyone to address the Planning Commission in regards to this item. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission? Please step forward, state your name and address for the record, and you may speak for up to 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm not a real good speaker. I'm Douglas Miller, and I live at 2291 Canyon Court. And so my bedroom overlooks the substation. And it's not a very good neighbor, of course. It's a substation. And I've lived there for 20 years, and it sort of gets worse every year. And one of the things is that when I heard about this, there's no information about what it'll look like. It's a monopole, and then H something or other, and it's going to be 100 feet high, which is much higher than anything that's there now. And so I'm thinking, I walk from my house down across the railroad track up to Food Gathers to get the bus. There's a nice woodsy area, and then there's a substation that's heavy industry right there. And then I go up to Food Gathers. And on the way back home, there's this really high up substation with nice big pine trees that screen it. You walk up a little farther, and there's the big industrial thing. Heavy industry. I mean, this is big trucks, gigantic transformers. It's loud. It's lights on all night. So it's, it's a real deal. And so this will remove those trees that screen it. Now, in the past, they've had screening trees here and there on the slope behind my house. They've died, and they don't replace them. And so they're going to plant however many trees, and in a couple of years, they'll all be dead, and it'll just look like awful there, because there does not seem to be any requirement that they replace the trees. Anyway, and then the thing is, when you're walking across the railroad track, and you look up at the substation, it's high up. The flat area must be 50 feet higher than the road. And then that's going to be right there with all the trees removed, another 100 feet up. And it's just, I just can't envision what that's going to look like, and it won't be screened at all. And so I think that it would be worthwhile just re-reviewing the landscape plan that they have here, because it's just not enough. And especially not enough unless they're required to replace trees that die. Anyways, so that's what I had to say.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this item? All right, seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the ITC Phoenix Utility Substation Planned Project Site Plan to allow a 100-foot tall monopole, a 70-foot tall lightning mast, and a 65-foot tall H-frame structure. Consistent with the plan project standards for approval, the petitioner is providing setbacks in excess of what code requires. Do you have a petitioner, or do I have a commissioner who will move this? Moved by Commissioner Gabrandel, seconded by Commissioner Sauvé. We are now in discussion. Commissioner Ackerman.
I just, if I could, during the public comment, the speaker discussed the trees that die. Just as a reminder for the Planning Commission, you may recall this site was one of about, I want to say 18 or 20 sites that were city-initiated annexations a couple of years ago. So this particular site was never site planned in the city prior. It was previously in an adjacent township. So to be clear, as part of the city site plan requirements, we do in fact require maintenance of any proposed landscaping at minimum over a short-term period to ensure that the plantings get established. But over a long-term plan, a longer term, it's not to say that we are proactively out inspecting all these sites, but ultimately, if it is raised to our attention, we do then have the ability to go and compare the site to the approved site plan, and it would be able to work with a property owner to make sure the site plan becomes into compliance by replacing any dead material. So just wanted to frame that one particular issue.
Commissioner Ackerman, I just have a quick question of the petitioner that I think will help our discussion here. So what is a monopole? What is a lightning mast, and what is a H-frame structure? I just want to make sure that I have the right images, because I don't. Can you describe, or if you have images of it, can you just give us a quick overview of what those three items are?
Absolutely, and I actually have a design engineer here with us, so he will be able to give you a better technical description, but those are all necessary to be able to have those two new line positions coming to the substation. So that's the purpose of the monopole.
I'm looking for, what does it look like?
Oh, what
because
does it
I'm sure
look
I've seen it. I just want to know what exactly those are.
In the veg brochure, Brett's get a model for us.
Yeah, it's right there.
So which is which?
So a monopole would be one of these three here. It's probably actually going to be this one, with the phases on two sides and one on the other side. H-frame is something similar to this. This is a transmission H-frame. We'll have a substation H-frame.
Okay.
And the lightning mast is similar to the monopole. It's just shorter in height and smaller in diameter.
Okay.
The monopoles, I would imagine, are actually probably not terribly dissimilar from a typical cellular tower monopole. They probably have different antenna arrangements, but they're just that, a single pole, as opposed to sort of a more ironwork, latticework type of tower.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when looking at the site plan attached to here, would page 6 be the closest to an elevation? It's the looking north section AA sheet.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah, it'd be page 6 in the site plan on each tracket, which reads looking north section AA.
Yeah, it's right there.
That one, yeah.
Okay, there we
Yes,
go.
so that's profile view.
Yeah, there it is. That's a looking north.
Yes, that's looking north from Varren.
And so that would be the closest to an elevation that we have here as the best way to visualize it.
Yes.
Is there anything in this image that would be a good point of reference to better understand scale? I can visualize 100 feet-ish.
So the chain link fence is on there at 7 feet tall. It's the line that goes to the bottom.
Okay.
They are not in this.
And so your closest neighbors would be on the east side of the property?
To the north and to the east.
To the north and to the east?
It's the Foxfire West Park.
But yeah, so you have a buffer of parkland to the north, but the closest property lines, would that fair to say be to your east?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And so the installations of the area that has the built environment now, we're looking to place the monopole and accessory structures furthest
Southwest,
west?
yeah,
Yes.
Okay.
southwest of the site.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And then, so could you quickly talk us through your screening plan? It seems like when you have a industrial facility adjacent to residential areas, that's probably what we're going to hear most. And I was just hoping to get an overview of what plantings are going where, how it's going to be improved as you expand these structures, and then what your long-term maintenance plan is. And we can tackle each of those one by one if you'd like.
Yeah, that's on our natural features plan, woodland trees. So we have a woodland tree classification table. Yeah, and then the landscape plan.
So,
There we
yes, well, for the landscape plan, we've proposed to add new trees along the east side there to provide additional screening for the Foxfire West Park. We've also added new trees to the south of the station to provide more screening to Varren Road.
So to the east, it looks like 4 different species of plantings for the most part. Could you
Yes.
talk us through what those are?
It looks like white oak, hawthorn, flowering dogwood, tulip tree, arbor vitae, serviceberry. So I'm seeing 6 in here.
Okay. And so I'll actually probably defer to another commissioner to better assess if those are going to be appropriate quickly and year-round. And then maybe if I could return to some questions around stormwater, I'd be grateful. But if we could start with screening?
Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Yeah. So quite a few of those species are quite short, except for the white oaks. And I guarantee you that your arborvitae will be eaten down to nothing in the first winter when you go through the deer that are very thick in this area. So I know that the city requires you to use native species. This is something that perhaps with a little bit of work with the city forester, who I'm sure understands the pressures of deer that are a very real part of even in the extreme interior of our city, but definitely even more in the exterior of our city. I would really consider changing those out to a different evergreen that also is a little wider, taller in stature, to be able to address some of the screening concerns, especially from a second-story window. I don't think an arborvitae is really going to be able to address the real issues with the screening that will happen in that area. The flowering dogwood and serviceberry are all pretty small stature as well, and so you might consider swapping some things out with just bigger species that would do a better job of screening. And I think it's important to have a mix of deciduous and evergreen. But I think the deer issue is going to be a big one out there for you. And again, your numbers are all probably fine. It's more just thinking more carefully about the species so that they're not eaten and so that the stature works better with the screening with the neighbor. One question I had, just as an extension of that was unclear to me. There was no plan that I could see where it was really clear what was existing to remain and what you were adding. So is this, like, are there trees, because there's quite a few trees on the slope that are there now.
Yes.
And so those are staying?
Yes, so on the landscape plan, all the trees that aren't in the tree planting table would be the ones that are staying. There are ones up by the fence line that are Xed out, and those are the ones that are going to be removed.
Okay, so in other words, there basically are, and again, it's a little hard to see on the screen here, there's very few existing trees on that east side. It's only on the kind of berm out at the front?
So, yeah, so on the east side, there are a few existing trees, but actually, when you go further up, there's already a existing buffer of trees.
I noticed that there were some, but I still think being a good neighbor in a residential area and considering that you're now part of the city and not part of the township anymore, it's kind of a different deal in terms of the expectation, I think, to be able to coordinate with city code. So it seems like with some minor changes in terms of species that the neighbors could have a more solid screen that's happening in there, and again, the stature. So that would be my 2 cents, Commissioner Ackerman, on the landscaping piece.
Great, I appreciate that, and staff and the petitioner taking diligent notes, and at the end, I'd love to discuss the best process for how to make sure some of that's codified. I appreciate that. The other part was a long-term maintenance plan for your screening. We heard from one of your neighbors about seeing paintings coated and die, and I just wanted to hear what your landscaping plan is, because we will hold you to compliance.
Right. Well, I don't know if this is written on here. Do you remember which page that's on?
Adele, address the DT fact versus ITC fact in the past in the district. Hi, Cynthia Stump, Regional Manager. This is Adele's first Planning Commission running solo on here, so kudos to her. So the DTE has owned this substation. So since 1968, DTE has owned and operated. When ITC was sold in 2003 from DTE, we got the high voltage transmission assets. So DTE, the previous trees are under ownership of DTE. So when the sites plan was built from Ann Arbor Township back in the day, certain trees were there. Some of those trees have died. We completely agree, because we wanted to remove those trees. So those trees have been removed from the ones up front. Some of those were the dead ones. And then in looking at this, some of the heights and statures are because of the assets. So that's where, like, where you say some of them, we can only have so many certain tree types by a substation or by transmission lines or even by distribution lines or what is coming out underground or overhead. So a lot of those tree species are articulated specifically because of what assets you have there. And then working with Carrie Gray, trying to meet the needs of the city, but also meeting the needs of DTE and ITC. So how we maintain, absolutely. If we plant a tree, we don't want it to die either, because we are biggest fans of right tree, right place. And that's where those trees, if you notice, everything is shifted to the east because you have a transmission line coming in from the west. And that's why they're not planted on that west side, because we can't have trees underneath our power lines. So the trees are shifted to the east to allow for that. So we would be responsible for that in partnership with DTE. But if we commit to have them planted, they will be their long-term maintenance. And if Brett calls or Kira calls or Jeff calls and says, hey, what's going on? We'll go out there, and we work with all the contractor agreements. You have to agree to certain agreements. All of that happens through our contractors.
Thank you for that commitment. I think as we discuss about what the most appropriate plantings are to go in first to really be be successful long-term, I think that'll be great. And Mr. Miller, to you in the audience, at the end of this, happy to kind of show you what it looks like in the plan so you know what to expect should this pass, and then give you the contact information of the person to reach out to at the city if you ever feel as though it's not meeting those expectations.
Can I say something else?
I'm sorry, unfortunately, it's not the form for that, but happy to talk to you after. So I want to turn to stormwater. I did note that the site is handling a 100-year storm on
Yes.
site, and maybe it's just top of mind because of California and the controversy surrounding Pacific Gas and Electric. As our climate is changing, natural disaster happens more and more often, and here it's that we're getting more and more rainfall. And I just wanted to better understand how stormwater is hitting the site now, how that will change as this is redeveloped or expanded, and then start to hear some sense of whether or not that meets the appropriate expectations.
So the stormwater system is being proposed to mitigate a 100-year storm. Stormwater that does not infiltrate through the existing gravel pad will migrate to the new retaining wall at the southwest corner of the substation, and all runoff will filter down the back of the wall through the MDOT 6A crushed gravel. Excess runoff that does not infiltrate behind the retaining wall will discharge through weep holes in the retaining wall that are spaced 20 feet apart. The stormwater that flows through the weep holes will be captured by an infiltration trench below the retaining wall. And the infiltration trench has capacity to infiltrate a 100-year, 6-hour storm. And we came up with a solution also working with the Washtenaw County Water Resource Commission. And I believe the stormwater infiltration trench plan, that's page 11, has better oversight.
Is this standard practice for your stations around the state?
Yeah, so standard practice is for it to infiltrate through the crushed rock. If it's an extremely wet site, we do tend to put retention ponds or whatnot outside of the station. This being a retaining wall, I think this is one of our first times doing this, so it is a new practice for us, doing the weep holes and the infiltration trench.
Okay. And is your standard practice around the state to plan for up to a 100-year storm?
Yes.
Okay. Has that changed over time in any way? Have you noticed
Not
any
thus
stoppage?
far.
Have you noticed any interruptions to service because of increased rainfall?
Clarify, interruption to service to the transmission lines, or?
To either the transmission lines or to the substation itself?
So if we have had, again, just to clarify, so you're asking if the water doesn't run where it's supposed to run, what do we do?
Yeah,
that-
or maybe before that, elsewhere in the state, we're seeing more rainfall than we have
Right.
ever before, and you've had this site since '68, or at least DTE has, and probably conditions have changed pretty dramatically since then. And I'm wondering, the last thing we want in a major storm event is substation failure. So I just want to better
okay.
understand.
Thanyou, okay.
Thank you.
So typically, in working with the professionals, whether it be, thank you. Usually not a quiet one. So typically, in working with the professionals, whether it be city staff, county staff, whomever, the drain requirements, and then our consultants outside meet what everybody believes to expect. 100-year flood, 500-year flood, whichever criteria based upon the floodplain that we're in. If there is found that some of the substations begin to have water pooling, then the design engineering team works with the local consultants to determine why. So if we have a substation that has been around since the 40s or 60s, and we find there to be water, then we work with the local jurisdiction to figure out why. Often it's because of the developments around the surrounding area, that way it's being infiltrated in. And so we would look at to mitigate that differently, but we do constant inspections of our assets, and that is also a priority for us to maintain that safety and reliability. And we do have one that is currently under inspection now, but in the past 15 years I've been at ITC, we've had to do a couple of different drainage options to ensure the water is running off into different areas, or if it negatively impacted residents, but specifically a whole substation, no, because they construct them to where they are higher up, so you don't have that concern.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. And then to staff knowledge, and maybe that's not fair, and perhaps the petitioner knows, but a number of substations are having work done throughout the city. Are all, I mean, obviously this is a unique site, but are all built to similar specifications in terms of stormwater? Is this fairly standard practice?
This particular substation is existing, and it's since 1968, and it's DTE owned. So we cannot really say that all substations, the ones that are constructed by us, they follow a standard procedure, and there's specifications that we keep it consistent. But if it's, if it was built or constructed by somebody else, that's we cannot really comment on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And from our perspective, thinking about South State.
Yeah, I don't recall specifically, but we could pull that information to a company. Should this proceed to City Council, we could include the information to see how this stormwater approach compares to that. As a reminder, within our Unified Development Code, we do look at substations very specifically. We specifically require substations to go through a site plan review process where a lot of other components of utility services, such as distribution, are deemed essential services with a lot of exemptions from development requirements.
Understood.
But in short, because of the code requiring and mandating site plan review, I would fully expect that both South State and this, while the technique may be different, they're meeting the same standard of stormwater requirements. The Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner and any future substations that went through the process would have to meet that standard as well.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all my questions for now. I still want to return to Commissioner Gibrandal's points around screening and figure out the best way to codify that as we take next steps.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Could I also just extend the stormwater discussion a little bit
Please.
longer too? So I get that you've got this gravel layer on top. Are you basically capping things that are there with more gravel, or there's existing gravel and you're like, the thing that I'm confused about, so I look at old aerials and I see erosion on that west slope. It's steep and it goes down to Traver Creek, and it's right there. The creek is right there. There's not a lot of buffer going on there. So when I look at that, I see that it's pretty hard to be able to control the subgrade underneath that 6A that you've got. You don't really know where it's coming out of that hillside. You don't really know where it's coming out of that gravel pack, right? Unless you're scraping that whole thing and regrading the whole thing so it's all going down to that south side, it's pretty hard to tell. So my question is, how do you really ensure that that whole, I mean, it's gotta be an acre at least of area is pitching towards the south, towards your wall? How do you make that happen?
Seeing as how it's an existing site, that's hard to do at this point.
Yeah.
All we can do is try to, for our expansion here, is to do the best that we can to get the stormwater off in an appropriate manner.
So, but how do you even direct it towards that south? Like, how are you saying that there's 100-year pitching towards there?
So.
And
look at
without doing major regrading of that surface at the top? Or is it almost better just to try to create something around the entire thing that is more of a buffery something? Because if I'm seeing erosion on old aerials, then clearly something's happening there. So is there a way through, like, even just, I mean, that's just stabilization. That's not even like stormwater being retained anywhere or detained anywhere, infiltrating anywhere. That's just an erosion issue, but it just tells the story that something is going on there and that it's not really being controlled in the way that we're hoping that it would be now that you are in the city, and that we really try to stay on top of these things. And the creek, again, it's the creek, it's right at the bottom of the slope.
Right, and that floodplain extends up to the extent of the hill there, so
Right.
any cuts around there would be into the existing
Right,
floodplain. So
exactly,
there's
right.
not a lot of options in that area. We have looked into that, and it's, like I said, the floodplain goes right up to the base of the hill, so there's.
So what did the Water Resource Commissioner's Office say to, like, how did they, I'm just curious what kind of direction they gave you to be able to try to control this when it's something that is so difficult to be able to really control?
So I was not present at those meetings. I don't know if Jeremy or
We had proposed a floodplain management to the Washtenaw County Water Resource Commission, and their comments, we addressed every comment that was given by all of the reviewers. Their reviewers included city staff and also the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commission, and we addressed all those comments, and we had our floodplain management. All of this information has been uploaded in eTrackit. We did come up with a flood management that was accepted by them, and we did fulfill all of the requirements. In terms of what could happen in the future, I do understand your concern, and we have tried to, address all of the issues, and also tried to be compliant by all of the ordinances. And even when we were looking at the monopole, we looked at the alternatives analysis, and per city's suggestion, we kept our monopole out of the floodplain, so that was one thing that we did, and we went on 3 different revisions of the site plans that you see in front of you. And if there are, certain things that are beyond our control, we've been trying to work really hard with the city and trying to address all these issues. We're also working with DTE in terms of, trying to wrap up this project in the city.
So maybe, clearly things have been reviewed by agencies, but perhaps one of the things in terms of staff following this in the future is that you're not just looking for whether trees have lived or not, but you're looking on that west slope too to see if there's active erosion that's still happening. Because even just shifting some of the species along there in terms of their deep rootedness and things like that could help slow some of that. Because it is, that's why I was wondering how they're doing this, because it's a tough nut to crack, what they're trying to do here. But I'm really not very confident that it's actually addressing what we want it to. And so if there's some way to be able to follow whether erosion is continuing to happen, that then there could be some sort of plan B in terms of figuring out how to stabilize that west side. Because when I look back through time in the old aerials, it's just there. It's just there. It's a steep slope, and it's probably all just running off. And it's been a gravel parking lot for a long time, and it doesn't stay open forever. All those fines get in there, and it just starts acting like a normal old, we like to think that gravel roads infiltrate, but really, they don't really infiltrate, and that's been there since 1968. So I guess I would just like to have eyes on this as an issue that could be followed, and that the petitioner would be open to having some sort of mitigating plan to try to deal with erosion on that west side. Because again, it's Traver Creek right there, people. And that's the very northern extent of Traver Creek that we can do anything about. So if we're just hitting it with sediment and junk at the very start, it's gonna be hopeless further down. So we really need to do what we can in the areas where it hits the city line to try to keep it as clean as possible.
Further discussion? Commissioner Mills.
I'm just curious, in doing a search within the UDC, I didn't see if there's anything specific to substations. I know we do require site planning as opposed to other kind of electrical infrastructure, but there's no specific requirements, right, for substations?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. In terms of the screening, I know we're really focusing on the section that's new, right, to this, but does the entire site now and the screening that's required meet the ordinance of our code? They're being asked to bring this all up to current standards, is that right?
Are you referring to the screening?
Well, screening or general land use. You know how sometimes there's a trigger of pulling everything up to current standard versus only dealing with the section that you're talking about. And so can you give us a sense of whether?
Yes, we looked at the site holistically.
Okay.
So the screening, the landscape screening came from specific requirements for replacement. Since there's not a parking lot per se on the site, we didn't require any parking lot screening, but we did need to find places for vegetation to be planted. And it made sense that since the northern stretch of the site is a wooded city park, and that the western side of the site includes a lot of these transmission lines, that most of those trees needed to go on the southern side and on the eastern side as a buffer to the Foxfire neighborhood to the east.
Got it, okay. I know that our code doesn't currently talk very much about lighting, but this is something that we are starting to talk about. And my husband designs electrical substations, so I know that there are lighting requirements and that there are different lighting requirements on different things. I just encourage you, because this is something that we do care about as a city, to light it to the minimum standard possible. I mean, it's good for everybody. It makes you a better neighbor. It's better for electrical use, which you should care about. And I would anticipate that hopefully this is something that the city will be looking at in the future. And so because you're in the city, you would be in the future expected to follow any ordinances that we have on that. So just as a heads up, because I know, as your neighbor also said, lighting is something on a substation, you know, that can be a nuisance to surrounding properties.
Commissioner Briggs.
One of the other recommendations or requests in one of the letters to us was that the monopole be camouflaged, and so I'm curious if this is something that ITC has experience with in terms of camouflaging poles. When I do a Google search, it looks like palm trees and pine trees are the camouflage options. I think we can rule out one option here, but but I don't know if that's something that you have experience with in other places, or you know, if it's something you evaluated for this this site.
As my manager Cynthia said earlier, when mitigating, when doing the landscape screening, we have to keep we have to keep in consideration the safety of our electrical equipment. Unfortunately, trees don't go well with power lines, but in terms of camouflaging, we will provide all the screening possible. I'm not sure whether
I think you're talking about the actual pole, right?
Yeah, the actual monopole.
So I appreciate your research. What you've found, those are probably more cell phone towers. So you'll see the coconut, I call them the coconut trees, but my kids call them the coconut trees. Transmission towers themselves really aren't. They're either the monopole, which are the steel, we call them the steel, monolithic steel poles. In some parts of the country, they use a different color pole. But the standard in ITC is the monopole, the steel, because it is actually found that because Michigan has more gray days, that the steel blends into the surrounding atmosphere more.
Camouflage on its
But no, we don't paint the poles different colors or anything like that, because there is a standard that's based for the design. So unfortunately, we don't paint them or do anything. It's just the standard monopole.
Okay, so it's not something you have experience with. Okay,
No.
I'm not going to recommend that, but something I'll start paying more attention to.
But we do light some of our poles for Christmas.
Not these types, though.
No, not these types, no.
That is towers far away from homes.
Commissioner Sauvé.
There was mention of a temporary bridge over the waterway, and so I'm actually curious more about the timeline. What's temporary in terms of this project timeline?
Sure.
I'm Jeremy Kuhn, I'm the project manager for this. The temporary bridge would be installed for the access across Traver Creek, for the construction access to put in the monopole and then remove any vegetation that needs to be removed. The timeline for that would basically be that it would be installed as soon as we were approved to move forward with the project. And then I would not imagine that it would stay in place. The in-service goal for this project is the end of February, so it would be removed ahead of that. There would be no need to keep it in place once the pole was in place and all the wires were moved over.
So we're talking 2 months or less.
2 or 3 months probably, yeah.
And then beyond the bridge, to the extent in that floodplain, what other sort of conditions are you taking? Are you putting down gravel, or are you guys just driving over grass? Like, are you digging mud pits through tires?
No, I mean, anything that we think would create ruts or, a situation where you're gonna have a mud pit, we would mat that, and that would be on our DEQ permit. There's gonna be no gravel installed. We're not proposing to cut into the hill or anything like that. The impacts to the hill will be as minimal as they can be.
That's questions I have.
Commissioner Woods.
In part of the communication that we received, it talks about the fact that the site is noisy and busy. So can you explain a little bit about the noise, and is making these increase in the height and everything, is that going to increase the noise level, or give us a sense as to what neighbors should expect?
So our addition won't add any additional noise. The noise typically comes from transformers, from the hum from them. Those are the DTE-owned parts on that sub. So what we're adding will not add any additional noise.
Okay. So you're making the distinction from time to time about what DTE owns and what you own. So is it now you, or is it still DTE? And
it's a split use substation.
It's a split use.
Yes.
Sorry, it has a transmission, so this this existing substation will have transmission level equipment and the existing distribution equipment, so it is shared with DTE. Because the voltage will have, as I explained in my presentation earlier, so electricity flows through our high voltage transmission lines, then the voltage has to be reduced, so that's a distribution part, which is DTE, in order for it to be delivered to your homes and businesses. So it's a shared, so it will be a collaboration of both ITC and DTE.
So is the hope that these improvements are going to mean that residents on that side of town are going to get better service?
That's the goal of the project, to improve the capacity and reliability, which translates in less outages.
Ah, okay, all right. I'm assuming that the noise from the hum from the transmitters, that's meeting our noise standard, Mr. Leonard, or whomever?
The city's noise chapter does talk about decibel levels, and decibel levels typically that exceed 60 decibels would need to be regulated. Noise during construction is also regulated in terms of time, typically 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. This project does not come close to hitting that kind of decibel level.
Oh.
So it would not be triggering any kind of regulation.
Okay, but if residents should think, wow, what's going on over there, it's really, really loud, can Mr. Miller and his neighbors call DTE or ITS, or who do they call? Or community standards?
It depends on what the condition is, but certainly we'd be happy to talk to them about what their concern is. Community standards can certainly investigate, but it might be also good to get contact information from DTE as well as ITC.
Okay.
And we do have a customer line, so we take into consideration inquiries from residents, and we have a 24/7 line where they can call, and those concerns will be addressed. And we have done in a couple other projects, we have had an engineering subject matter expert who has gone out in the field, has measured the noise level, and it was found to be in compliance in terms, but we do have that available, so.
Okay. And so this is to connect this substation with, I think it's one called Phoenix or something near Hubbard Avenue, Hubbard Street or something. So has the construction, the underground construction from those sites already happened, or is that part of what happened as Plymouth Road was torn up some months ago, or is this something that's still still to happen?
We have actually, we're almost wrapping up construction, so construction is nearing completion right now. And we have completed work in Varren and I believe it was in Nixon Road, so, and restoration has been completed. And what's left right now is pulling cable at both substations, so it'll be Apex, the one that's on Huron Parkway in Hubbard, and then also this, the existing substation that we're mentioning tonight, which is the Phoenix on Varren. And we're expecting completion by either end of this year or early next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I have a couple comments. I guess more importantly, Commissioner Gabrandel, you brought up a really good point with regards to what's happening there and how that's affecting Traver Creek. And I, in good conscience, to support a project that will further potentially cause damage to the creek and all that stuff that's going down. I mean, just looking at the aerials, this evening was the first time that I actually looked at the aerials of this site. And it is, you know, going back to the 90s through 2018, that the ground, I mean, it is coming into the creek. And so the only way that I would feel good about supporting this is if we add a condition to this motion that ITC address that issue. I don't know maybe the correct language, if you can help me with that. But I definitely think that needs to be a part of this because this is our only opportunity. We're not going to have another opportunity to fix this. So if you don't mind maybe coming up with some language that we can add to this motion, I would appreciate that.
I think it's really, I think we probably don't have a lot of hope of really addressing infiltration in the goal that we have, but I do think that we have a good chance of being able to control the erosion so that we don't have sedimentation just flowing off that hillside and going into the creek. So the water will likely still be going there, but at least the ground will be more intact because there just isn't enough, it's too steep to be able to create some sort of shelf, you know, where it can sit and infiltrate. You know, that's the hard part about these really steep slopes. So I think that there's I mean, it's without going out there and exactly seeing what's going on, looking at aerials, I think that at the very least, let's go for serious erosion repair and control of that area. And that, so give me a second, let me see if I can.
Sounds good.
Put on my ordinance writing or my code writing hat, which I
While
don't.
Commissioner Gabrandel's looking at that, Commissioner Woods?
I think that it sounds like this is complicated enough that it's not something that we can really address sitting around the table right now. I mean, I'm wondering whether or not it needs to have more staff input as well as the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner, yeah. I was just losing it for a second. Because I think Commissioner Gabrandel has raised very serious concern, and I would be in favor of postponing it until, and giving that kind of input, and then perhaps that would make a little bit more sense, because it does sound pretty complicated right now. So while she's contemplating something, I would be in favor of a postponement, or if Mr. Leonard has more information to give to us.
Mine's probably not as good as Commissioner Gabrandel's.
What are your feelings on postponement versus hashing this out this evening?
Well, ultimately, that's at the discretion of the Planning Commission. If you, I guess along those lines, to your point, Commissioner Woods, I don't know that I agree, I don't know that we can solve it. However, if you were comfortable, we could ask ITC to provide that detail. That would give staff the opportunity to sort of vet what their approach is because this particular petition is progressing to City Council, we could ensure that that is addressed. So it would, to that point, I wouldn't be able to tell you this evening what that plan is, but you could consider a recommendation to City Council conditioned upon them incorporating into their plans a long-term, they already have to comply with soil erosion under the Soil Erosion and Sedimentation Act, so they will have to do it during construction. This would be taking it a step farther to require that they do soil erosion repair and long-term maintenance and measures to ensure that that is mitigated over the long term. So I guess my gut and preference would be if Planning Commission were comfortable to put some language as a condition that says you, as part of the Planning Commission's recommendation to City Council, you believe that that should be incorporated in the plan as it progresses to definitively answer that question.
I'm nodding yes, so my colleague can work on that. But I think that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm thinking, and I know that Commissioner Ackerman will no doubt make sure that he looks at it when it gets to council. But it's probably helpful for it to happen before it gets to council so that you can work it out. So that's my comment.
Like a hawk.
Thank you.
May I just add, is that okay to add?
Sure.
I'd say this is, while the first substation expansion of ITC within the city of Ann Arbor, I believe staff and council can commit to the communication that ITC has had on all of the actions that we've done on any of, whether it be our underground transmission line or a future overhead line on the southern part. Our due diligence and our efforts are, we pride ourselves on being best in class. And so we reach out through the Water Resource Commission and all the staff, and if there are recommendations to make it better, we really will try. And when Adele talked about the different things we're involved in the communities, we're not going to leave. We are truly involved, and we do support the efforts. And while our staff person who was with the Water Resource Commissioner was not able to be here tonight, I'm texting her frequently. It's like, can you help us? And we have worked with staff, and the Water Resource Commissioner has actually had the same type of questions, she said. And so the result of what our designers worked with the trenching and the different channels, that was to help meet the needs of what some of the questions was too, because it's the first time since, in 45 years, my math off a little bit, it's been addressed. So if there is concern, we would ask also that it be worked, or we could work it through with staff to manage that, because it's a whole group of design people that have to sit down and do that. And I believe that's your background also, right? So that's what, we have those people that look at that to make sure, because we don't want to impact Traver Creek any more than anybody else. And it would be in partnership with DTE, and I respect there is that, well, how does it still work with DTE and ITC? And because there is that joint ownership, the whole reason for the project is because they want to serve their residents and their businesses. So they would be at the table as well from the substation design side, as well as the project side, as well as the community affairs side. DTE, ITC, Water Resource Commission, and staff would then all sit together to meet those needs. But we would, to meet the need of the reliability concern, if we could ask to do an amendment to move it forward, it would be helpful to make sure the right designers can try to get to what the goal of what we're trying to get to.
Great. Mr. Leonard.
I would just add as another frame to this, keep in mind this is a planned project, site plan. And I think that in the staff report, we've talked about the reduction of stormwater runoff. This kind of provision, while you're adding it, would actually probably also further the satisfaction of the requirements for a planned project. I think this would be going above and beyond the minimum Washtenaw County Water Resources standards potentially, and our steep slope standards potentially. And so that would also be potentially another justification that both you could consider in the planned project modifications, as well as ultimately for City Council's consideration.
Great. Commissioner Gabrandel?
Okay, so first, I want to hear Mr. Leonard's, and because I kind of have the intent in through here, and I feel like your wording will be better, and it might be better just to shape what you've got. So I would like to hear what you've got, and then we kind of shape a bit.
So I have that you'd amend the motion that ITC provide details on the plans that address soil erosion repair and long-term maintenance of such measures to reduce soil erosion and sedimentation impacts to Traver Creek.
I think that sounds good. The only thing I would add is if it's going back to the table, then I'd say we also look at the potential for redirection of stormwater towards the proposed stormwater infiltration system. Because I think that there could actually be just I mean, it's not my job to design this, but I could see some ways that they might be able to, along that western edge, with some creative thinking, be able to redirect it towards the area where they are controlling it. And I think it just hasn't, been thought through enough to be able to do some creative thinking around that. So I think that at the minimum, we restabilize that slope, but I think there also is some potential for redirecting the stormwater as well, so that if somehow that potential for redirection of stormwater towards the proposed stormwater management system, if that could sneak its way in there too.
Okay.
I think that would work. And then the other thing is, yeah, I think that gets at it, to control erosion. That's going to cover it, really.
Okay.
So,
And then I guess while we're talking about potential amendments to the motion, there was some discussion about revisiting species, particularly along the eastern property
Yeah.
line. Is it mostly the arborvitae that
it's, the
we could
arborvitae is
have
going to be
them
eaten.
maybe
Yeah,
talk with our
so
forester
you're
about
gonna need to-
potential?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, the arborvitae, and then, you do have a bunch of white oaks though, and those are no small things. And I know they're on the east side, but perhaps, and you're pulling at my heartstrings, because that's my absolute favorite tree, so I can't believe I'm saying this. But perhaps you could swap a few of those out with some larger evergreens. They get just as big as the white oaks to be able to address the concerns. I understand what you're saying. I don't want to mess with your lines. And so I get that you need to have some shorter species as you get closer to the transmission system that you have. But you do have, white oaks can get massive over time. So clearly you've reached some sort of safety zone as you're getting closer to the eastern edge, that you might be able to put in some larger scale evergreen trees that are not deer candy.
So we have a motion that's moved by Commissioner Gabrandel. Do we have a second on that? Oh, I'm sorry, the amendment. We have an amendment to the motion, seconded by Commissioner Mills. Do we have discussion on the amendment? Commissioner Ackerman.
Just to clarify, the amendment was expanded to include the species that's documented? All right.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on the amendment? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Oppose? All right, moving back to the amended motion. Commissioner Briggs.
One more question in terms of screening. So if I saw correctly on previous picture, it's a chain link fence of sorts that's surrounding it, right? Is there a reason for the chain link fence to be sort of transparent? For example, as opposed to having like a green fence that's sometimes used to provide a little bit of, well, I don't think it would necessarily affect noise. Maybe it would help a little bit, but it provides that sort of look of greenery when there's none there particularly. So I'm just curious if there's a need for it to be transparent, or if that's something that has been utilized in certain locations.
I don't know if there's a need for it to be transparent. It's just our standard chain link fence that we use. If
I'm gonna
Step
jump
right
in
in.
there, sorry. So security-wise,
I
yes.
wondered. Yeah.
So there are many people who love to see what's inside of a substation. The picture you had up there is like, oh, who got inside of our substation? So yes, so our security, and again, DTE put the original fence up, but from an ITC asset owned, if there is a fence, we have to maintain to make sure there is nobody trying to access that fence, trying to impact the equipment in any way.
Okay, I thought that might be the case. Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Okay, we're ready for a vote. All those in favor, are we ready for a vote? Commissioner Mills.
I was just not sure if there was actually, if we were letting staff sort this out, or if there was a motion to postpone. I couldn't quite follow that before.
I don't think we put that on the table. We talked about it, but we just amended the motion
Got
to
it.
put it in staff's hands before it gets to city council.
Got it.
And to clarify, our intention would be to try and answer these questions both about the species along the eastern side and the stormwater potential along with stabilization of the soil erosion, so that when it progresses to city council, we have those answered per your direction. So I want to be clear that our intention would be to answer those before this plan progresses forward, not to necessarily just wait till keep those conditions flowing all the way through the process.
Right. Yeah, no, I get that. I'm just
Okay.
wondering if I just wasn't sure. I generally like to keep things moving, but particularly like if it's sort of already been thought of, the erosion business, and it's just hard. I want to make sure that this is an opportunity. I mean, and I do think that this is the planned project benefit. And so maybe that's just, and now it's going in the notes, that I see that as the primary trade-off. In a planned project, in exchange for meeting some of the criteria, we give some leeway over what our ordinances typically allow. So we typically have a height limit. They're asking to exceed that. And so in exchange, there are a range of criteria. One of them has to do with natural features, protection of natural features, and I think that being a better steward of Traver Creek is the primary benefit here. There's some, there's an argument about setbacks, but it is where it is. Like, they're not gonna move that substation up to the road. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. I think that the primary benefit here is a natural features one. And so I think it's really important that we not just do the easy thing, but we do the right thing. If it is possible, it should be done. So if you as staff feel like you can convey that on to city council and push along the way, I'm in favor of moving this forward tonight. Otherwise, I think I like that we have a planning commissioner who has expertise on like how you might stabilize slopes. And so that's just my 2 cents.
Absolutely, it's a great point. While it's not incorporated in the motion, we would forward that along with the proposed motion, that really the emphasis on the offset of the planned project modification would be the opportunity to improve Traver Creek. So.
And may I ask a clarifying question? So with us, the motion, so the proposal ITC is in front of tonight is for the Finch expansion, and as an essential service. So with it being a existing substation, so the runoff that has been, but what we're doing is not increasing the runoff. So could it also be that the expansion, again, to meet the reliability need of the project, because if the project does not move forward, the customer of ours, DTE, can then not service the need of the residents in the area. Could there be a look at, yes, for this exact need to bump the fence out by 18 feet, which is not going to impact the soil erosion through all of the permits that we've gotten through the Drain Commission, any soil erosion permits in the DEQ, that would be considered, because that's what we're in front of today, knowing then that as the larger scale, now that this is now in the city of Ann Arbor, that there needs to be a larger partnership project of what's going to happen with Traver Creek, because with this 18-foot, it's minimal impact. And that's through all the calculations that have been submitted through all the agencies to look at it. Because if it's a longer concern, the commitment is there, and I believe that's on both sides. It's just that because this specific project is not impacting that, and all the calculations that have been done for that is not through the 18-foot expansion.
So, go ahead.
So to be clear, I don't think you are saying this, but to be clear, certainly not, I don't think the expectation is ITC solves Traver Creek. It is,
You
but,
say that, Brett.
but I think the expectation is that this is an opportunity for you to solve it along your parcel. And it is a shared parcel with DTE, and because you are asking specifically for some modification from the requirements, that's where the standard comes from. So, so even though from your perspective, the sort of intensification of that use might be relatively minor, it does require this modification from our standards because it doesn't meet the base standards, and therefore that's why I think that's where Planning Commission is making this finding. So even though it's a relatively modest impact, there are aspects of it that are actually significant compared to our standard. That's why I think it's warranted. Does that make sense? I'm not, it might not be satisfactory, but yeah.
You may not like it, but.
All right, further discussion. Commissioner Gabrandel.
One other piece I would say is one of the partners, your community partners, is the Huron River Watershed Council. And they will be an excellent resource, and perhaps even in this process of some potential techniques that you may use for what is especially happening at the creek edge, and perhaps even up the slope from it. So if you're a partner with them, then I'd say bring them into the discussion, because they have a lot of experience with these things. So they might be part of the dialogue as this moves forward, and then you'll really be partner.
And if I could just, I think we're also struggling. We don't have the petitioner's rep that was part of this conversation, nor the Water Resources Commissioner here. Right. I just want to make it clear, it's quite possible that there are plans to already address many of these issues as part of the plans presented. I think if it's not, we'll work to incorporate those appropriately. If it is, we'll do a better job to make sure that we're explaining that as it progresses about how it will accomplish those goals.
Right. And I would just say that they may end up mitigating that in terms of how they're handling the stormwater. Regardless, there is erosion on that slope that is clearly visible, and that needs to be addressed. So.
Further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? It's approved as amended. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to 10C, proposed text amendments to Chapter 55 UDC. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you. So these next two agenda items are two staff-initiated proposed ordinance amendments. The first, do I have them in order right? The first being mobile food vending services. So as some background, the reason that we as staff have initiated this proposed amendment is that over recent years, we've had numerous inquiries for food trucks and similar services in the community. And our ordinance, while beautifully reformatted into the Unified Development Code, still has a lot of content from long ago. And so if you will recall, we have a few what I would say are clunky and restricted temporary use provisions. They're more focused on whether or not it is the owner of the property or not the owner of the property. And if it is not the owner of the property, then it requires a special exception use, which is a pretty tall standard for a temporary use. And furthermore, we have seen sort of, I would say, some level of market demand for these. We do actually see them functioning at times and at office locations and sometimes at special events. And so in response to sort of a shifting desire to for this relatively new use, our intention was to amend our code to provide an opportunity for them to basically be legal and more easily legal within the community. So this has been through a couple of discussions already at the Ordinance Revisions Committee, and then it was also benefited from a working session discussion by the full Planning Commission. I'll go through it and try to highlight a couple of the changes that have been incorporated since the last time the Planning Commission has seen it. First of all, under the mobile food vending service definition, based on some conversations with the Washtenaw County and Public Health Department, they recommended adding under the Michigan Food Law of 2000, that is the base statutory requirement on which such vending units would be licensed. There are numerous ways they can be licensed under that. There's different classifications and categories, but that is a broad designation of mobile food vendors, and probably appropriate for us to set the stage that we expect when these uses are being realized in our community that they're going to follow that basic state law. So that's the definition, and then when we get into the actual provisions, these would be new provisions to accessory uses. I'm proposing that this would be an accessory use to all mixed-use and non-residential special purpose districts. You will recall originally that we had proposed accepting the downtown districts, the D1 and D2 from this. Based on your feedback from prior discussions, that is now included, so this would be an approved accessory use in those districts. Going through the requirements, we had a lot of conversation about where they might be located on a property. The first is that they can't be located less than 10 feet to any public right-of-way or within any required site distance triangle. As a reminder, we want to keep intersections and streets free from visibility for both vehicular, non-motorized, and pedestrian safety. And we also want to provide that there is some on-site opportunity for use and queuing so that a vending service, for example, isn't up at the sidewalk where people might be obstructing the passageway of other users of that public right-of-way. On a property adjacent, there's a lot of conversation about how they might relate to residential zoning districts. What you will recall, we started with sort of a pretty significant one that we highlighted in an early draft that we didn't think it was appropriate, but it was worthwhile to discuss. What this language does is essentially says the setback requirements of the zoning district where the proposed vending service is located when it is adjacent to a residential district would have to be followed. And that's significant because sometimes zoning districts have an additional standard when adjacent to a residentially zoned property. If it's not adjacent to a residentially zoned property, it could still go anywhere on the site relative to that. There was a requirement that it has to be a compliance permit would have to be sought. There was discussion about making sure that there was a possibility to amend that over the term. We envision this being annual, so if you as a vendor came in and you have first identified one property, but then you wanted to add another, we're specifically providing the opportunity to be able to amend that permit as opposed to starting over. And per a question, all food vendors do not have to be licensed by the Washtenaw County Health Department, but they do need to be licensed by some health department under that food law. Technically, they are supposed to notify the Washtenaw County when they are licensed under another health department but operating in Washtenaw County. My impression is that happens on a spotty basis. Having this in effect might help us to communicate to them what permits we're getting that might actually help to advance that cause going forward. So I think they were excited about that partnership. Trash and recycling, it seems the same. We have to provide trash within 10 feet from the vendor. Another suggestion from the Public Health Department was to expand our responsibility of the vending service for removal of waste. Specifically, they suggested inclusion of both solid and liquid waste, and more specifically, making sure that we were incorporating wastewater, grease, and oil. So I think when our preliminary discussions were frankly more focused on customers and sort of wrappers and litter, but it's really important too that they're not just dumping wastewater or grease out into a parking lot. So this makes sure that there's an expectation that they do that properly. There's obviously more specificity about how that occurs from the food law and waste requirements, but we just wanted to make sure that people are expected to follow it. There is, I think, ultimately I didn't have direct sense of where we wanted it as far as density. So what I'm proposing in this language is you could have one food service vendor for every 10 parking spaces. You'll recall at the outset we had originally sort of just had a couple of categories. There was some talk about whether we should have any limit. So I hope this is somewhere in the middle of where the discussion was. I think it provides a fairly high frequency, but still some balance of expected accessibility of a business along with such vendors. And then finally, it can't present any parking traffic, or the last one is kind of a catch-all. You just can't violate any laws and make sure that it sort of links it to any expectations of operation. So this has been, as we said, through a couple of different versions. It's scheduled for a public hearing this evening, barring ultimately any tweaks or consideration, either further discussion by you or after your favorable recommendation or not, it would progress to City Council.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to open the public hearing on this. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this amendment to the UDC? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and read the motion. The Planning Commission recommends that the mayor and city council approve approve amendments to the Chapter 55 UDC code as presented. Do I have a move by Commissioner Trudeau, seconded by Commissioner Mills? Discussion. Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Leonard, for capturing a lot of our thoughts that have gone a bit all over the place as we've learned about this industry. Speaking of the industry, early in the process, we got some pretty impassioned feedback about the initial draft we examined. I was just curious what outreach we did to those individuals who came in our first couple meetings.
Sure. At the ORC meeting, we did put together a list. About a dozen folks provided names and email addresses. I notified them of this appearing on the agenda tonight. We also, as is typical for any ordinance amendments, we notify all commercial associations and all neighborhood associations, in addition to the notice in the publication. Based on that, I heard some questions from Downtown Association, but never received any feedback. And then from one individual expressed a lot of, I would say, skepticism that staff's intention was to somehow penalize local businesses, that they were specifically asking about the operation of an existing facility, and were asking questions about whether that was would be compliant under these proposed provisions. The short answer is I don't know. I hadn't done that analysis and conveyed that my intention wasn't to legitimize one, but rather to find the ordinance language that might accommodate these uses appropriately in the city. So that's the feedback that has been conducted leading up to this, in addition to, of course, the working session and ORC discussions.
Okay, thank you. So I appreciate that. I just asked because the crowd has dwindled as this process has gone on. Usually it's the other way around, where not a lot of people are engaged earlier in the process and then get engaged now. Okay, I'm grateful. I think a lot of the inquiries that staff has gotten about these are perhaps folks who are operating within the city and want to do so in a legitimate framework. And I guess I am a little bit nervous about zoning them out of compliance. And so just wanted to gauge your thoughts on that and perhaps other colleagues' thoughts. But overall, I think this is a great framework, and I'm comfortable with it because I understand the conversations that have gone into it.
I'll leave it to other commissioners on the second part of that, but from my perspective, keep in mind the intention was that they're not really provided for now. So, in fact, we wouldn't be rendering any out of compliance. As the particular question about this individual had raised Ricewood, which is associated with Morgan and York site. I think that, again, I think it would be compliant. I haven't looked at it specifically a site plan, but that's a circumstance where it's not, it happens to be on a parcel that is not adjacent to any residential, so it's at the rear. It's not.
It is not adjacent to residential?
It is, there's actually, the parcel is, but the zoning district, that parcel actually has a split zoning district where the buildings are commercial and the parking lot is parking. My recollection is that's actually on the commercial side, so there's actually a whole zoning district buffering from the residential, so there'd be no setback requirements. The important thing is, I think, to convey is I haven't done a detailed analysis of that one or any facility for that matter. So.
Okay, fair enough.
Commissioner Briggs.
Yeah, just on that note, since there isn't anybody in the audience anymore, I do think that this is reflective of a strong public process. I mean, people were very angry about what was being initially proposed, and I think this sort of signifies, especially if they've been notified, that that there isn't that sort of negative reaction to what's in the, what's being proposed. So as a point of clarification, so kudos to staff. I mean, I think it's been a good process with moving kind of slowly so that there's been ample time for feedback. Now that there's this new process, with the past existing process that has been used to allow for food trucks, is that still an existing route that could be utilized?
Yeah, any site could seek outdoor sales through a special exception use. So you wouldn't have to go through this provision if you wanted, for example, to look for the use that complied with some different set of criteria, for example. I frankly don't know why you would.
I don't know why you would either. I'm just curious. I guess
and that provision would still apply to things that aren't mobile food vendors. So if you you wanted to do a mobile piercing studio, that might be the avenue for that, or I don't know. I'm not going to try to guess at any other sort of.
Very good. Thanks.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Just to the last outstanding point, which I think was the density. I think that sliding scale, the linear sliding scale, makes a lot of sense. So I'm grateful for that recommendation.
Commissioner Mills.
I agree with everything that was said. Process, sliding scale. I know one of the questions that I had was about, we distinguish between residential zones, but residential uses, and I think we were talking about whether there's anything else where if it's a residential use within a otherwise mixed use, whether there's a setback. My scan of the UDC shows that we don't accept screening for trash receptacles in alleys or parking lots or something like that. Does that seem right?
Conflicting land use buffer. As it relates to parking lots and conflicting land use buffers, I think it is residentially zoned or used properties. So.
Because it's not a setback distance, instead it's talking about what you're planting along the way, which I don't think that makes sense. I am very comfortable with what we have here, just to kind of close the loop on that one.
All right. It looks like we're ready for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Oppose? All right, thank you. Moving on to 10D, proposed text amendments to Chapter 55, Unified Development Code, Article 4, Development Standards, Section 5.18, Special Dimensional and Site Layout Standards of the City, or Ann Arbor City Code. I don't think I was supposed to read all of that, but here we are. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you. And also another staff-initiated proposed code amendment. Over the past decade, the city has heard via the Zoning Board of Appeals probably around 50 petitions for front porch or front yard setback variances for front porches. The convergence of standards that lead to this frequency are that we establish the front yard setback by any component of the structure. So whether it's sort of what I will call the principal wall that has windows and the entry door into this structure, or a open porch off the front of that, whatever is farthest forward establishes the front yard setback, established front setback of that property. Over time, many property owners in the city have desired to take advantage of what we now consider to be a pretty fundamentally positive community design principle, the notion of open interactive space with the public right-of-way, the notion of interacting more with your fellow neighbors and literal eyes on the street from a safety perspective. And so many property owners have sought to alter their properties to construct an open porch. And many of them over time have found that they didn't have that ability because the setback requirements didn't give them that space. So this proposed amendment would provide a specific exception where an unenclosed porch, deck, or platform, it would require to be covered by a roof or canopy. So it couldn't just be an open deck or an uncovered porch. It also has to be unenclosed and cannot be more than 1 story, could extend up to 8 feet into a required front yard setback. So the intention here is, regardless of front setback restrictions, to provide basically every R1, R2A, and R4C homeowner the opportunity to do a covered front porch or deck that would be no more than 8 feet encroaching into a required front yard setback. It would not be closer than 5 feet to the right-of-way. And when this standard is invoked, it does not move the front setback of that property. We still consider the principal wall of the structure to be the established front setback.
Thank you. I'll now open the public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this agenda item?
Please speak to the microphone for closed captioning.
Seeing absolutely nobody in our audience, I will close the public hearing and read the motion. The Planning Commission recommends that the mayor and city council approve amendments to the Chapter 55 Unified Development Code as presented. Do you have a commissioner that would like to move? Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Woods. And we are now in discussion, and I will actually start this off. I had the honor of chairing the Zoning Board of Appeals for 4 years and serving on it for a couple more years before that. And this was on our agenda on a very regular basis. So I'm very happy to see this. This will alleviate a lot of anxiety and financial burden that's put on our residents who want to just make their homes beautiful and who want to be a part of the neighborhood and more part of the neighborhood. So I am very supportive, and I think this is long overdue, and I'm so happy that staff has come forward with this. Commissioner Trudeau.
Thanks. I've been quiet tonight. You've all been very thorough. I have 2 questions. One is, was there discussion of and reasoning for not including R2B and other R4 districts? I'm just curious.
Yes, I think that there were, my perception, and I don't profess to have this long history with the city, is that in some of the other districts there might be more of a prevalence of high density or group housing, and I think that there was, frankly, just trying to find a balance of where these petitions come from. I guess I don't fundamentally have a problem, but we seem to have less requests for variances from group houses and fraternities and sororities and R2Bs and the like. So I think it was just intended to be probably in the districts that are probably more prevalent with lower density, single family, and the types of petitioners that we've been seeing at the Zoning Board of Appeals. Not a more comprehensive analysis than that, just sort of instinctual and sort of land use pattern.
Yeah, and I mean, it didn't shock me to see that list. I was just wondering
Yeah.
if there had been any underlying reasoning there, and I think this is a reasonable place to start. And it sounds like if this is where ZBA is hearing them, that's the problem we're trying to solve, so that makes sense. The other question I had is, it was a little bit unclear to me when I was reading the language with the last sentence. Says, for premises on which such encroachment occurs, it's not clear to me whether the encroachment it's referring to is the overall like 8 foot into the front setback, or whether it's the encroachment into the 5 feet from the property line. I'm pretty sure it means the first one, but it seems ambiguous to me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The intention is that, if your front, I'm going to use front door for your established front setback. If your front door is at your front setback requirement, the intention this would provide up to an 8-foot porch. If your front door were 2 feet away from the required front setback, this would provide up to 6 feet encroachment into the required front setback. Again, we're saying you deserve an 8-foot deep porch, but you have to sort of maximize the ability within the required front setback. And so the encroachment I'm talking about could be anywhere from 1 to 8 feet into the required front setback. The 5 foot is an absolute that would say that if you're, for example, if your established front setback happened to be 8 feet from the property line, this wouldn't help you unless you only wanted a 3-foot deep porch.
Right, and I think what would actually clarify this entirely for me is we switch the last 2 sentences. I don't know if that affects anything.
No, that's why
only
we're here.
because it seems like it could be implying that in some case a property might encroach into that 5 feet by putting that sentence last. And if we just switch the order, then it would be very clear that the encroachment in that last sentence was referring to that 8-foot guideline, which is otherwise very clear to me, and I think I understand the intent. But that was the only thing that was sort of somewhat ambiguous in my reading of it.
So you mean put the last sentence would become no unenclosed porch, deck, or playroom shall be located within 5 feet?
Yes.
Okay. I think that would work fine.
Is that friendly to whoever moved it and seconded it?
Who did move and second that?
Someone on this side.
All right.
Mills and Woods.
All right.
Commissioner Mills.
This actually follows up on that very same issue. So you noted that currently when we calculate what the average front setback is, we treat everything together. So unenclosed porches are also, it's the front of the unenclosed porch as well. Does this change all of that, or is it only for new ones that want to be built? I just don't want to create like a nightmare for you guys in calculating how you figure out what the front porches are, because I feel like we should be consistent.
Yeah, we talked about this, and I believe it is imperfect. The intention is that it would apply to sort of any new construction that is invoking this, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to permit it. But at the same token, we were trying to find the balance so that it didn't just start over time driving that setback forward. If this property owner does it and it moves 8 feet, and then this property owner, that didn't seem right either. So the short answer is the intention is that it would apply to new structures. We would have some record of them because they would have to invoke this standard as part of our approval, or it would just be after the date of adoption. And it could change, well, it probably wouldn't change the setback, because on those then, they're still going to be governed by that average, and then that would at worst sort of give them the ability to perhaps build up to a porch line that was already compliant with the setback, and then this would give them the potential to extend further into the required. Does that make sense?
Not
let me try that again. So,
well, I mean, I was the one who raised this, right? Of the whole idea of are we just slowly going to get closer and closer? But I know I raised it, but I almost feel like our 5-foot minimum front yard, effectively, is our safeguard against things being right on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And I just don't want to make it, I don't want to make your life more difficult when you need to go. It's already a pain to go out and figure out what the average front setback is.
Yeah.
And so why add to this a complicating factor of like, okay, we need to figure out all of those properties within 100 feet if those porches were built before or after this particular date. That just seems like really complicated.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Probably the ultimate answer to that would be to actually go back to that original provision and say, nope, porches don't count. That might have the impact that would have the impact of changing the front yard setback requirements of a lot of properties in the city. Generally, probably moving them further back
Right.
I guess it seems to me that with some, perhaps this isn't well crafted enough yet, but with some language that tries to acknowledge that the intention is not to drive them forward, the worst, if this is a bad thing, is that you might have 2 feet, right? You might say you have an 8-foot porch on your house now, and 2 feet of it is outside the required front setback.
Is encroached.
It encroaches. Technically, you might be able to then build out your living room to 6 feet further out, and then still extend another 8 feet out from that. But again, as long as we have that 5-foot safeguard, this is sort of acknowledging that in that circumstance, we're not seeing that as necessarily a terrible thing to neighborhood character.
I was going to say, I mean, the whole idea behind this and the way that we're pitching this is that we generally think this is a good thing. We want people to have porches, right? And so again, but we also want to make sure that sidewalks are safe, and that if the sidewalks are getting so much use that we want to make them wider, that we have some ability to make them wider. So we've given ourselves that with the 5-foot. I think I would suggest, and I'd be happy to make an amendment, to just strike that entirely, to make compliance easier and measurement easier for you. Because this is something that you guys calculate on a regular basis.
Yeah, so if I understand, so your intention would be that if your neighbor takes advantage of this, they would be effectively altering their structure so that the average front setback for the neighboring properties are impacted as well.
Right. I mean, that's what currently, our current code has that effect.
And
this would continue to have that effect.
And if at all, it's probably going to reduce that setback. It's going to get closer, and our setbacks in residentials are not maximums, they're minimums. So it's off the cuff. I don't think that would have necessarily a detrimental impact.
Yeah.
Commissioner Gabrandel.
Are the steps leading up to the porch part of the calculation, or no?
No, currently our ordinance allows steps to be located anywhere on the property, so we sort of just were silent on them and just let that govern.
Okay,
So
that's
those
what I just
could
wanted
be
to
right
make.
up to the
Yeah,
right of way.
that's what I wanted to make sure, because, you know, you shouldn't be punished because your house is 4 feet above, your finished floor is 4 feet above the grade, and you need 8 steps, which then takes up all your room for your.
I still don't know if you can do that in 5 feet, but that was the intention.
So that would be that,
yeah.
right. Okay, I just want to make sure that, right, exactly, right. And just out of curiosity, why 8 feet? I'm just curious, where did 8 feet come from?
6 seemed too small and 10 seemed too big. I mean, we were, this is staff initiated. We spent a lot, and to be clear, like I think there's staff that are really on my team that are concerned that is this going to somehow drastically change the character and physical appearance of structures. We have, for example, take a kind of a 60s ranch neighborhood. It's easy to see front porches on turn-of-the-century homes in the historic districts. How might this manifest in a 60s neighborhood? I think there's a way it can, but it might evolve. But as part of that, we were just thinking about size and just the actual dimensions of what's the right dimension to have room for chairs and a table and maybe passage, and trying to find a balance of something that seemed plausible and usable, but not too excessive that it was driving too far from an encroachment perspective.
Yeah, when I just look at aerials in the Old West Side, it looks like it's kind of in that zone when I compare it to the 5-foot sidewalk, so not precise, but I was just curious, where you're looking.
To be clear, we did not look at aerials. It was more about our perceived usability of dimensions.
Yeah, okay, that's it.
Further discussion? I think, Commissioner Trudeau.
I'm just curious where we're at in terms of what, is there an amendment that we're discussing, or is there?
That was a friendly, so your change was the friendly amendment, so
Yeah.
this is the actual motion and the
All right, and are we striking that sentence?
That was like if anybody else wants to, that's kind of the way I left it.
Correct.
I would support striking that sentence. I don't know, I actually don't know who made the proposal for the amendment, because I don't think I moved it. Do we
It
know?
was, so it was friendly.
Okay.
So the striking, we have not, is that friendly?
It's friendly to me, but maybe we should vote on that.
Yeah, why don't we, since there's some question, so the motion would, a proposed motion to amend might be to strike the last sentence, that is, for premises on which such an encroachment occurs, the principal front elevation will continue to establish the existing front setback.
I'll make it.
Moved by Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Trudeau. Discussion on striking that sentence that got moved that now we're gonna strike.
Right.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, it's, the change has been made, so we've stricken the sentence that starts with, for premises on which such. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, it's approved. Thank you. The ZBA is probably watching right now, live, cheering this.
You're welcome, ZBA.
I will make sure to call Chair Briere to let her know. All right,
Still goes to city council.
that it at least passed through Planning Commission.
Yeah.
All right.
You all don't have that much power.
Maybe one day. Yeah. No, not at all. No. Moving on to audience participation. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the the Planning Commission? Seeing no one, we'll move to Commission proposed business, and I will be the first to say Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, including those of you who are watching at home. Happy Thanksgiving. And my apologies to Commissioner Ackerman for not paying as much attention to you since you're the only one on this side at this meeting, so I apologize.
And my apologies, the monitors just weren't working. That's for the lopsided arrangement. I will follow up on my request after the last meeting to see if we can re-repair them.
Thank you. Is there any other commission proposed business? Do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Briggs. We are adjourned. Thank you.